Today I'm going to show you how to build a simple and sturdy outdoor bench, and then we're going to kick it up with some spank flair.
Hit it!
Now the inspiration for this piece came from a bench that I saw outside of my wife's lady parts doctor, and she's pregnant right now, so every 2 weeks we're going in and out of the office. But I saw this bench sitting there, and of course I wanted to inspect it, maybe even take some measurements, but like a good husband, I escorted her up to the doctor's office, made sure she was comfortable, rubbed her feet, all that stuff, and then I came back down and inspected the bench. Now, I was inspired to build one, but I wanted to use this as a lesson for design, because I don't consider myself a really great designer, but I can share my process and maybe it'll help you out. Right? For me, it's a two-stage process. Number one, I designed something that satisfies the core functionality I'm looking for, making sure it's strong enough, making sure the proportions look pretty good, and that the joinery is designed to do what it's supposed to do. Then and only then will I start to embellish the piece and make it look a little bit more fancy, a little more customized, and maybe a little bit more like my personal style. Right? And that's the lesson we're going to go through today. I'm going to build a basic version inspired by that one outside the doctor's office, and then we'll just soup it up a little bit. We'll add some spoilers and fins and just see where it goes. All right, let's look at the wood. Now the wood I'm going with is African mahogany, and the reason I chose that species is because it's worked well for me in the past. Now you may not necessarily even find this wood on your sort of top 5, top 10 lists of outdoor friendly woods, but it does have some rot resistance, and in my personal experience, I have a few chairs out of African mahogany that have done very well outside, so I'm hopeful that this will work well for the bench. And when it comes to outdoor wood, you got quite a spectrum. You have your really expensive stuff up at like teak and eBay, and then you have the more fairly priced stuff like cedar and cypress, right? So you've got a lot of choices. It doesn't really matter what you use. Use something that's available that you can afford and you like the way it looks. And for me, this African mahogany was kind of middle of the road price-wise, and I've got experience with it that shows me that it holds up pretty well in the environment I'm going to put it in, all right? So use whatever you want. This is what I'm going to use. Let's start cutting the stuff up. Using the cut list, I strategized the placement of my parts for the best grain as well as the best use of material. Each leg is made up of 3 pieces, so it's a good idea to get them all from the same piece of stock, giving us the best color and grain match. For longer pieces like the aprons and rails, it's important to use boards that are already nice and flat, otherwise they'll be too thin after planing. If you have some wavy boards, use those for the shorter aprons and slats. I break the parts down at the miter saw and then rough cut everything at the bandsaw. I try to cut everything extra wide at this stage. This is especially important on the longer pieces since those have a better chance of warping after the cut. Now all the pieces are roughly cut to size, and I'm going to work on one part at a time. And first we're going to start with the legs. Now the legs are about 2 1/4 inches square, or as close as we can get to that dimension. And to get to that extra thickness there, we're going to use 3 pieces and glue them together. Now in the ideal world, we'd have material that was thick enough to do this all in one shot, but this is all I got is this 4/4 stock, so 3 pieces should do the trick. So I'm just going to mill up both faces, and then we'll be able to glue these together and create our leg blanks. Each leg piece is jointed on one face. The other face is then planed parallel to the first. Don't worry about the edges just yet. Arrange 3 pieces for each leg so that the grain is aligned in a way that makes visual sense. Now I'll spread a generous amount of glue on each glue surface. I'm using Type Bond 3 for its outdoor-friendly characteristics. The boards are then sandwiched together and clamped. I'm using 2 strips of MDF as cauls to help distribute the clamping pressure, but also to protect the mahogany. Even though the pieces have rough edges, you still want to make sure that they aren't slipping too far past one another as the pressure is applied. By the way, if you're short on clamps, you can easily glue up 2 legs at once to help speed things up. As you can see, I'm very fortunate to not be short on clamps. Once the glue is dry, sand any of the excess squeeze out and head to the jointer. We can now mill our legs to final dimension as if they were one single piece of solid stock. While planing, you'll want to send each piece through twice at each setting, hitting 2 faces and keeping the blank nice and square. If you wind up just a little bit less than 2 1/4 inches, don't worry, your legs will still work just fine. With the stop block in place, I can cut all 4 legs to their final length. Now let's do some joinery. Now I've got my legs all grouped together, oriented the way I want them to go, and you can see my grain is consistent through these pieces, and I've just labeled them front left, rear right, front right. And I also placed a mark on the top here just to remind me where those mortises are going to go. because that's going to be the next step. So let's take these apart and we'll be able to lay out the mortises on one of our legs. So here's one fully laid out and ready to go. And the reason I do this is because it really is a common sense check. I make sure that everything is located where it's supposed to be, the size of the mortise is what it's supposed to be, and I compare this directly against my drawings and the SketchUp file. Right, so once I have this done on one, I can be pretty confident and use this for my setup, because on the rest of them, all I really need are two marks. You can see I've got the mark on the end grain, showing me which side my mortise will be located on, and then I've got a square here set up to 3/8 of an inch. So I need a line for that 3/8, and another one set for 1 1/8, like this. We'll do this on the other side as well for this mark. And those are the only marks we need. Those are start and stop points for the router, because the router setup is going to do the rest of the work. All you need here is the router, an edge guide, and the bit. And I've got a 3/8 inch spiral bit. Upcut is preferred, but you could use downcut if you needed to. This is all we really need to make repeated mortises. Let's get the setup going. I secure a small piece of MDF to the bench as a stop, and then bring two of my leg blanks together top to top. Position them so the mortises on each leg are on the same side. The legs are then clamped securely to the bench, and the MDF strip keeps things aligned. The router is then set up, aligning the bit with the layout lines. And the depth is set using the turret stop. My strategy for mortising is pretty simple. I start by plunging the front of the mortise at full depth, and then do the same thing at the back. Now I can remove the material between the holes in 2 to 3 passes, going deeper each time. The reason for pre-routing the start and stop points is twofold. First, it allows me to accurately establish the start and stop points of the mortise. Second, it gives me a clear zone so that even when I can't see what the bit is doing, I can feel the end of the cut and stop before I go too far. Using the same setup, I can route the mortise on the second leg. 2 down, 6 to go. When repositioning the legs, be careful to note the position of the mortises and make sure you're always referencing from the same side of the leg. In my case, I'm referencing from the inside surfaces. Using dust collection, the routing is a little less messy, but it's still hard to see. The start and stop holes will prove very helpful. When all the mortises are cut, bring the legs together again just to double check the layout. Now the rest of this project stock needs to be milled down to 3/4 of an inch, and we'll just do everything at once. Well, now that all of our pieces are milled to size, we can do a little bit more mortising. The top long pieces have quite a few mortises for all of those slats, right? And we'll use the same methodology we used before with the router and the edge guide, only this time we're going to use a 1/4 inch bit. The layout is done on both rail pieces while they're clamped together. Consult the plans for the proper spacing. It's easy to get confused here, so make sure you clearly note the mortise areas. The edge guide is then positioned so that the bit is centered on the thickness of the rail. Notice that I'm keeping the rails clamped together as it helps stabilize the router. If you still have trouble with balance, add a third piece to the stack. Now I know this is a lot of routing, but I think it's worth it. True mortise and tenon joints are incredibly strong, and they'll serve our bench well throughout the years. All you need to make the mortises is a router, an edge guide, and some patience. When all the mortises are done on one rail, flip the assembly around and do the other rail. Well, that was a lot of mortises, but now we need to move on to the tenons, and we'll use the table saw and a dado stack to cut those. I use a cutting gauge to scribe the shoulder lines. This helps with setting up the saw in the next step while also helping us prevent tear out. The aprons, the narrow slats, and the wide slats have slightly different tenons, so I lay out one of each. At the table saw, set up the dado stack for a 3/4 inch wide cut. Use the layout lines to set the blade height conservatively, and use the cut shoulder line to set up the fence position. Now make the cuts and use a test piece if you have one available. The fit is a little bit snug, so we'll raise the blade and cut again. And that's the fit we're going for. Now we can cut our actual work pieces. Now we can use the same setup for the slats, only we'll have to change the blade height. You might have already noticed that we have a bit of a square peg, round hole situation, so we'll round over the sides of all of our tenons. I use a chisel and a rasp to get the job done quickly. And that's what we're going for. Now some of your tenons are too tight, use a shoulder plane to peel some material off the tenon cheek and sneak up on that fit. Well, that sure is a lot of rounding over of tenon, so you might be wondering, is this the most efficient way to get the job done? Well, like anything in woodworking, there are multiple ways to get the job done. For instance, with those mortises, if I used a hollow chisel mortiser, I would have had square mortises to begin with, and it would have been unnecessary to do this. You could certainly square the mortises yourself with a chisel if you wanted to, but I find that to be more labor intensive than just doing this rounding over. Now, with this many tenons, it probably would have been more efficient to come up with another option, something like the Festool domino. You could even substitute pocket screws for all of these. Dowels would have worked just fine. In some cases, biscuits would have been okay, but they're a little bit shallow, and I think we need a little more strength with this. So long tenons are probably your best bet. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways. Before you even ask the question, why didn't you use X, Y, or Z? The reason is because I like to show you methods that involve a limited set of tools, even if they mean a little bit more work. And this way, everyone can do it. And if you've got an easier method, then by all means, do it. So now with all the mortises and tenons cut, we could do an assembly and get a look at what the bench actually looks like. All right, well, what we have here is what I'm considering the basic version of the bench. Everything's still fairly square, but in and of itself, the design is quite nice. I mean, I think I'd be happy with this as it is right now. But we can do a few more things that will beautify it, at least in my opinion, and make it look a little bit more elegant. Now, you may disagree with me. This is where it ventures off into a matter of taste, so you could do whatever you want with your own bench. I'm gonna add a few details to the top, as well as the legs that I think will really refine this piece and make it look just that much better. First, I'm going to cut a slight curve into the slats. I made a template from scrap that's about 1/8 of an inch in at the center point and stops just a bit short of the tenon shoulder. With the curve drawn on each slat, we can make the cuts at the bandsaw. If you have an oscillating spindle sander, you can make quick work of cleaning up the curved face. If not, you can use a flexible sanding strip and scrapers to do the cleanup. And here's a cool trick. If you line up all of the cut slats between the rails and press them together with clamps, you can sand all of them at once, making sure the curves match up perfectly. While we're working on the slats, I'll take a moment to use my smoother to clean up the edges. The smoother is much faster and leaves edges that are nice and clean and square, whereas a sander would tend to round them over. Now let's work on those legs. I'm going to add a 6-inch taper to the two inside faces. The taper will remove a 1/4 inch of material at the bottom of the leg. I'll use a shop-made tapering jig to make the cuts. The jig is just a piece of ply with a 3/4 inch runner for the miter slot. The leg is then held in place with clamps and stops, allowing me to pass it through the blade at a slight angle. Make sure you plan the order of cuts so that the first taper faces up when doing the second taper cut. The tapers lighten the look of the legs and give them just a little bit more elegance. With the tapers cut, I'll add a slight crown to the legs. I made a little template that I can use for reference on the end grain. As you can see, we're adding this crown to the two outside faces only. I'll use the same template on the bottom of the legs, making sure it's flush with the outside faces. Because of the tapers, the template will overhang the inside faces here at the bottom. To do the shaping, I'll use my jack plane. I'll keep an eye on the end grain marks as I remove the material on the face of the leg. Once I'm down to the pencil line on one side, I can move on to the other side. A flexible sanding strip can be quite useful once again, as the legs are smooth to perfection. A final hand sanding breaks all the edges and preps the leg for finish. And speaking of finish prep, now's a good time to run all of our slats and aprons over the router table to put an 1/8 inch roundover on the edges. Remember to only put a roundover on the bottom edge of the apron pieces and the outside edges of the seat rails. For the slats, you could put the workpiece on its side to do the routing. Well, now it's time to do the assembly, and I'm going to use Titebond 3 because it is the ultimate wood glue, rated #1 by pros. Actually, it is a really good glue for outdoor stuff like this, and it gives me a little bit more working time, which is essential, especially here in Arizona. Things dry very quickly, and I need as much time as possible, especially for that top. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to put all those little slats into the mortises and try to get that thing glued up before it starts to dry. I'm putting glue in all the mortises, but the only tenons that get glue are the outside wide slats. Normally I'd put glue on all the tenons, but in this case, I'm working against the clock, and if I get lots of squeeze out, it could be a major cleanup issue. This part can be a little tricky, so I get the first tenon started and then hold it in place with a clamp. I could then get the remaining tenons aligned with their mortises and tap them into place. Once the tenons are aligned, I'll use clamps to pull everything together. The legs and aprons are a little bit easier. I'll do side sub-assemblies first. A little clamping pressure should do the trick, and notice how I taped on some scrap to help protect the face of the leg. Now before I glue the long apron in place, I want to attach a few cleats. Now the SketchUp drawing shows one long cleat, but there's no reason we can't break it up into smaller pieces. I just don't happen to have any material that long anymore. So I'm going to attach it with glue and screws to the inside face of the apron, and then I'm going to pre-drill for screws so that we have a means to attach the top to the bench. I'll drill 2 holes for attaching to the apron and 3 for attaching to the top. With some glue on the cleat, I'll use clamps to align it with the top edge of the apron. Make sure your countersunk holes are facing the right way. A couple of 1 1/8 inch stainless screws will do the trick. All 6 of my cleats are attached in the same manner. Now I can attach the aprons to the side sub-assemblies. By the way, I don't often have many guests in the shop, but when I do, I put their butts to work. Say hi to Rich. I gave all the parts an overnight cure period and started the next day with the finish sanding. Everything is sanded to 220 grit, and the bottom of the legs are chamfered to help prevent future tear out. Well, now we get to do everybody's favorite part of woodworking, finishing. For an outdoor project, you really do need to think about a strategic approach for your finish. Depending on the climate you live in and the sort of exposure it's going to have, you can cater the finish to your needs, as well as how much work you want to do in the future, because no finish really lasts forever outside. But there are some finishes that are a little more bulletproof than others, and we're going to do one of those here today, taking some inspiration from the boating world. The first product we're going to use is called CPES. That's Clear Penetrating Epoxy Sealer. Now, if you've used epoxy, you kind of understand what it is. This is a much more loose version that we can paint onto the surface, let it absorb, and it provides a great foundation for our top coat. And the top coat is going to be a marine varnish. This is called Epiphanes, a very thick varnish. We can thin it out, wipe it on, you can brush it on, however you want to apply it, but we'll add a few coats on top of this sealed material. And it's not quite bulletproof, but it's going to basically ensure that I don't have to refinish this thing every year. All right, let's start with the CPES. This stuff is pretty nasty to work with, so be sure to use a respirator. Combine equal parts of resin and activator and mix well for 2 minutes. Even though it's epoxy, the material is brushed on like any other finish. I'll keep adding extra finish to the thirsty end grain since that's the part that's going to touch the ground. The wood soaks this stuff up pretty readily. Once I finish one of the legs, I move on to the apron and work my way around the entire base of the bench. Everything gets coated inside and out. For the seat, I'll start with the underside first. Any runs or drips can be cleaned up when I flip the piece over and work on the show surface. I let the epoxy dry for 24 hours and then give it a light 320 grit sanding. If the sandpaper gums up, you need to let the epoxy cure longer. Vacuum up any remaining dust and get ready for the second coat of epoxy. This time, the surface doesn't soak it up as quickly, so you can work a little bit faster. Once again, every nook and cranny is coated. The second coat will be allowed to cure overnight, and I'll apply the first coat of varnish first thing in the morning. I'm using Epiphane's clear varnish, thinned about 50% with mineral spirits. The secret sauce in this process is that we're intentionally applying the varnish before the epoxy layer is fully cured. This way the varnish isn't just coating the epoxy, it's being glued to it. This is what'll help prevent the varnish from bubbling and flaking in the future. The varnish is applied with care using a decent natural bristle brush. Because the varnish is thinned, it should have no problems leveling out and hiding our brush marks. I let the first coat of varnish dry overnight, then I lightly sand with 320 grit and apply a second coat. After the second coat of varnish is dry, I switch over to Epiphane's Wood Finish Matte. This stuff will knock down the high gloss sheen and give us a much more attractive looking bench. The regular Epiphane's gloss is so glossy that you can't really even tell which slats are wet and which ones are dry. I'll apply 2 coats of this stuff, and each coat is diluted by about 10% with mineral spirits. But check out what happens as the first coat of matte begins to dry. Big difference. Once fully cured, it's time to attach the base to the top. A small blanket helps prevent scratching as I line up the base and drive the screws. On my outdoor projects, I like the tops to be removable for repair and refinishing, so there's no need for glue here. All right, well this is looking pretty good. The matte finish, I think, is really the way to go. For me personally, I don't really like the high gloss finishes. Now outside, a high gloss finish probably will do better because it reflects a lot of that harmful UV light. But the thing is, I just don't like the look of it, so I'll go with the matte. We'll see how it holds up, but it is an Epiphane's product, so I feel pretty confident that it's gonna last quite a long time, especially with that epoxy undercoating. All right, now just a few extra details. You could see took the design from something fairly simple, and we don't go nuts with it, right? We just added a couple details with that taper on the inside of the legs, the crown on the outside faces, and the curvature of the slats in the seat. And that's just such a minor detail, but it's amazing how much of a difference it makes when you sit in it and you realize, oh, that's actually quite nice. Right? So little details can make the difference in the final piece, and you could see you don't have to over embellish. There's a point where you go too far, you add too many things, or maybe you take too many things away. All right? So it's a practice of restraint as well. Okay, but I'm happy with the result. I can't wait to put this outside and just see how it holds up over the years. Hopefully you'll build one too. Let me know what you think about it. And hey, if you're not in the mood to do all these mortise and tenons, use one of the other million ways that you could put pieces of wood together. But if you want to do mortise and tenons, hey, it's a great project to practice on. Thanks for watching.